to.
Thank you. All right, education in ancient Egypt.
All right, so since I want to be a teacher, I thought I'd take a look at education in ancient Egypt. All right, so ancient Egyptian education was a system, or the system was implemented to educate the young children in various subjects and topics. Some of the common subjects included reading, writing, math, as well as religion, instruction, and morals. So that's a little bit different from today, because unless you go to a private school, you are instructed in religion and morals, really, usually. So education was held in high regard, and it was common for people with proper means to send their children to schools after a certain age. Girls were not sent to school, though. Instead, their education was at home. So their moms would be their source of education, like their teachers, and would instruct them in different disciplines such as sewing, cooking, reading, and etc. These tasks were considered socially important for women, and education beyond that was just kind of superfluous and not really necessary. So people of lower classes usually could not send their children to school because of the limited number of schools, and they were typically reserved for students from royal backgrounds and rich backgrounds with more money. It's not possible to trace the exact history of the ancient Egyptian education system, but it's clear that there is a certain form of education that existed back then. Education was necessary for the elite of Egyptian society because royal offices were generally remained in the same families for years. So it was customary for children of these families to be instructed in the required disciplines. It is possible that the history of ancient Egyptian education system had its roots at the beginning of the Egyptian kingdom in 3000 BC, but this can only be speculated because there's not any concrete historical and archaeological evidence. Okay, so how did the ancient Egyptian system work? There was a certain way that the ancient Egyptian education system was implemented. It was common for boys to be sent off to school at the age of 8. The most important subjects taught at school were math, reading, writing, arithmetic, geometry, geography, astronomy, medicine, and moral instruction. All the other subjects, which can be seen as important topics in Egyptian society of the time. After being instructed in these various disciplines, it was common for boys to follow the line of trade of their fathers. So if you were a royal child, you would grow up and then become a royal official just like your parent was. And it was the same more or less for other professions. If you were a scribe, then you might become a scribe or other, etc. Proper timings were followed in the ancient Egyptian education system. So school started in the morning, there was a break about midday, and then the rest of the classes were in the afternoon. So that's kind of similar to now, too. We have classes in the morning, have a lunch break, or maybe a recess, and then classes.
I like recess the best.
Yeah, it's usually
lunch is good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a toss-up.
Okay, what were ancient Egyptian schools like? So schools that taught ancient Egyptian education were generally attached to religious temples or government buildings. So education was constantly monitored and molded by the authorities, kind of what that implies. People who acted as teachers were generally priests of the temples or government officials acting as scribes. Writing materials for younger students consisted of wooden tablets to which material was copied from existing documents, and the tablets could be wiped clean after there was no further space left. For older students, they used papyrus.
Probably with wax on the tablets, on the wood.
Mm-hmm.
That's often what they did, I think. You'd take a piece of wood and they would put beeswax on it and they could scratch into it.
Okay.
And then when they got done, they could wipe it over like they were erasing it. And
Okay.
rewrite on top of it again, just to practice.
Okay, that would make sense. I didn't see that, but that makes sense then. There are different, so Egyptian schools, there are different types of the Egyptian schools for different people. So there were general village schools that instructed in like preliminary education, and then there were like generalized or specialized education schools for specific careers, such as a priest or a scribe. At the top of this hierarchy of schools was the prince's school, which was the most prestigious school and was attended by the sons of the pharaoh. And then, in addition to that, children of nobles and court officials were also educated in the prince's school. So there were the general village schools, the schools that gave specialized education, and then the prince's schools, kind of 3 of them. Ancient Egyptian teachers. So there are 2 kind of broad categories of these teachers, the priests and the scribes, which you can see in like the first bullet point. And then each of these classes has certain predefined roles to play. So for example, the role of priests was to teach them moral and religious education. And then the scribes had more secular things to teach. So the scribes would teach children to read and write and then go on to teach them other subjects such as math or medicine. Unlike in modern schools, there weren't different teachers for different subjects like we have now. So the same scribe would often or sometimes teach all the subjects. And this was especially common in village schools where the general population was instructed. Specialized instructors were found in schools that aimed to teach specialized education. So for example, there was a certain form of education called instruction of wisdom, which consisted of lessons on like ethics and morality. Other kinds of specialized education included the education of medicine for doctors, mathematics for construction work, etc. Okay, then subjects taught in ancient Egypt. There's a broad variety of subjects that were taught as part of the ancient Egyptian education. For younger students, the subjects were generally confined to reading, writing, basic forms of math. The range of education expanded as students grew older and included subjects such as medicine, mathematics, geography, history, music, and science. Books of instruction were used in ancient Egyptian education, which included instructions on a diverse range of subjects such as morality, ethics, humanity, and others. After the completion of preliminary education, most students went on to join the professions of their fathers, kind of like I talked about earlier. But it was not unusual for students to choose the path of specialized education in various subjects. So this specialized or higher level education was also imparted to the children of nobles and royal officials who were instructed accordingly. So kind of to summarize it all, and I have the summary bullet points on your handout so that you guys can kind of have like the overview of the education. The ancient Egyptian education system was elaborately formed and was structured to the current social and political needs of society. The hierarchy of social status and classes was maintained in education too, as it is evident from the fact that different schools existed for commoners, nobles, and royals. The education curriculum in ancient Egyptian education system was well-rounded and instructed children in almost all forms of knowledge that existed at that time. And then while girls could not go to school, they were sometimes given education in certain disciplines that were considered fit for women, including dancing, weaving, baking, sewing, things like that. Girls of nobles and royals could read and write as well, even though this freedom was not available to girls from lower classes. Then the purpose of ancient Egyptian education, other than forming educated individuals, was to maintain the structure of society as it was imagined by the ruling class of the time. And then the last one is the ancient Egyptian education system was well ahead of its time, and was one of the reasons that the Egyptians became so dominant in the ancient world as we know it. So yeah, that's just kind of like an overview for you guys on the education system in ancient Egypt.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. We like that.
It wasn't recording that, so that was good.
All right, Imhotep. What do we know about this guy?
Yes. So,
Oh, is it recording?
yeah.
It is. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I chose Imhotep, and one of the reasons why I chose him was because when I was younger, I remember when I went down to New York City one time. It was like I just saw all the buildings, and obviously when you're a little kid, you just look straight up,
Right.
and it looks and like it's just touching the sky and everything. So I was like, oh, I want to become an architecture one day, and I was like, it just was one of those like child fantasies I just never wanted to pursue. I guess I mean, it's not to say it's over, but
It's not over. It's not over until it's over.
yeah, it's never too late. So I wanted to talk about the most famous architecture of ancient Egypt.
In the world.
Imhotep was born in the 27th century BC in Memphis, Egypt. He was a commoner by birth. He was not born into royalty, and so therefore he had to work his way up. And at first, historians believe he began as a priest. Imhotep had a very impressive resume. He was a vizier, sage, architect, astrologer, poet, and even a mathematician.
And he liked walks on the beach.
And he was also a physician. Chief minister to Djoser.
Yes.
He reigned from 2630 to 2611 BC, and people considered him to be a demigod because he was great at healing the sick. Imhotep had a great impact on Egypt, especially with medicine, but I wanted to focus on the one, his biggest architecture. Yeah. So in 2670 BC, Imhotep was, as stated, a vizier and chief architect, but he had a lot of other titles. He was called first after the king of Upper Egypt, administrator of the Great Palace, chancellor of the king of Lower Egypt, hereditary nobleman, high priest of Heliopolis, and sculptor and maker of vastest chief. Although historians aren't 100% sure, since Imhotep lived a long life, it is possible that he may have served Sekhmet, Kaaba, and Huni. And I tried looking up some pictures of the other two gentlemen, but
that Huni's quite an attractive man.
I said the same thing. I was like, he's something.
I mean, a ladies' man, I'm sure. Thick. Looks a lot like George Clooney.
George Clooney, huh?
Yeah, looks a little bit like him. George wishes. Okay, go ahead.
So he's most famously known for his creation of the step pyramid. So Imhotep had dedicated the step pyramid to Djoser, who was the pharaoh of the time. The location was in the Saqqara, which is just outside the capital, which was, I believe, Memphis. If you could move it. No, but right over there, it's like, you see Saqqara and then
Saqqara,
Memphis. Yeah. It was also
north of Memphis.
It was also the first pyramid that was built in stone. Most pyramids were built of clay. Imhotep purposely stacked mastabas on top of one another, progressively making them smaller to form the shape now known as the step pyramid. Mastaba means an ancient Egyptian tomb made of mud brick, rectangular, and planned with sloping sides and a flat roof. Mastabas traditionally had decorations, and Imhotep continued that tradition. But when he was started the base of this pyramid, he first had started it with a square. And so then he had changed it back to rectangular, and I'm not sure if it ended up he ended up finishing it as a square or rectangular, because I saw two different.
Well, he enlarged it, I believe.
He enlarged it, so
So I think it went from square to rectangle.
to rectangle. Okay, yeah, and historians aren't 100% sure of why he did that, but maybe it's just because he wanted to be different, add some, a little spice to
Probably
his.
heard somebody else is going to build one the same size. He wanted to make sure his was bigger.
Well, that's actually the next point. The highest mastaba at the time was only 20 feet high. When he had finished this, it was 204 feet high, and it was the highest structure of its time. So surrounding the step pyramid was a temple, courtyard, shrines, living quarters for priests, and the area was 40 acres, but it was surrounded by a 30 feet wall. The wall had 13 false doors, obviously for intruders, and there was only one true entrance, which was the southeast corner entrance. Outside of the wall was a trench, 2,640 feet long and 131 feet wide. Djoser was so impressed by Imhotep's creation that he disregarded the ancient precedent that only the king's name appear on his monuments, and had Imhotep's name inscribed as well. So, when Djoser had passed away, he was placed under the step pyramid. Historians, when they walked in there, they said it was like a maze, and they found like 40,000 vessels. They're not sure what the vessels were, what its purpose was, but historians had noticed that Djoser's body was taken by grave robbers, but they had left the foot. So, and off the foot they found a lot. Well, it was like remarkable for them to find the foot out. Mm-hmm.
They're probably collecting that for recycling. Everybody collects the recycling. I don't think any of it ever gets recycled. Big piles.
A city. Some would consider what Imhotep had created a city. Historians consider this a complex city, and Imhotep had designed the house of the north, the house of the south, the Serdab, the Hebsed court, the south tomb, Temple T, and the northern mortuary temple. It was bigger than the city of Hierakonpolis at the time, and historians believe that the north and south house was supposed to represent Upper and Lower Egypt, and within those two, they had 13 small chapels. And the Serdab was a life-size statue of Djoser. The Hebsed court was a form of ritual where the king was given the right to rule. And over here, I'm pretty sure some historians claim that, or suggest that he was the first to want to, like, put pillars or make pillars that, like, to represent some type of, or, to some god, I forgot, I do mention it later. Temple T is basic from the outside, but beautiful from the inside because of its, Jed pillars, which means stability. So Jed is the god of stability. There are carvings, and one has a half-open door that looks like a real doorway, and it is a reference to the afterlife. The northern mortuary temple was a passage to the burial chambers. And right there you can see all his designs right there. Some consider his basically him to be a myth because of his how well rounded he was basically within every department. When the Greeks invaded Egypt, they had to admire Imhotep as a demigod and compared it to their Asclepius. It
the god of healing.
The god of healing. It was thought that Imhotep had treated and diagnosed 200 diseases, that he performed surgeries, and that he had done. He had made medicine for people to be treated. He was highly praised for his genius in medicine, and some historians call him the first physician. Imhotep may have had helped in Skemkhet's unfinished pyramid, because although they're not 100% sure of how long he had lived on for. He did live a long life, but they're not sure if he ended up having any help on that. Imhotep was considered to be multi-genius.
Thank you.
It was also
you're talking about him.
It was also compared to Ptah, who is the god of architecture and even god of wisdom. It is thought that he was buried at Saqqara, but his burial has not been found. Never found.
Did you hear the time traveler conspiracy theory about him?
I think I read something a little that he
was actually a time traveler that went back to Egypt to become famous.
Oh no, I did not read that one.
It's obviously very dumb, but this thing.
Yeah, he came back as like an advisor for the Egyptians.
Our
That's
future?
I think our future.
Haven't even hit him yet.
Yeah, there was another conspiracy on that
That's
one,
why
but that
he
one's a little
advised
too
too.
far fetched. So he came back as an advisor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Mm-hmm. And
That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to time travel.
yeah, and there was one works that they said he had built Temple of Edfu, but I couldn't find anything that mentioned his name exactly.
I think he has such a large like a legendary person that a lot of things get attributed to him, like time travel from the future, and he may not have actually done all of them.
Yeah, it was just the time frame for Temple of Edfu, and it is
Kind
just
of like with me, things get attributed to me, mostly crimes that I've not actually done.
all right.
Most.
No, but yep, that was Imhotep.
That was being reported though. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. That was.
Go check. Very good. All right.